The lamp flickered as Sarah Blackwell stood frozen in the doorway, a loaded rifle in her trembling hands, pointed directly at her husband's chest. Thomas sat motionless at the table, his hands flat against the scarred wood, eyes locked on hers. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside that cabin, the only sound was Sarah's ragged breathing and the creak of her finger tightening on the trigger. The people of Redemption Creek had warned him. They'd whispered at the general store, crossed themselves when Sarah's name was mentioned, told tales of her first husband found dead in circumstances no one could explain. They called her cursed, dangerous, the widow with ice in her veins. But Thomas Brennan had married her anyway. Now, staring down that barrel, he understood with brutal clarity that Sarah Blackwell had never feared a single soul in Redemption Creek. Not the gossiping women, not the leering men, not even death itself. She had only ever feared one thing: him. "Sarah," he said softly, "put down the gun." Her hands shook harder, a single tear carved a path down her cheek, and for just a moment the entire frontier seemed to hold its breath. But before this moment shattered their world, let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months earlier, Thomas Brennan had ridden into Redemption Creek with nothing but a worn saddle and a desperate need to disappear from his past. He was 32, broad-shouldered, with hands that knew both gentleness and violence. His routine was simple: work the lumber mill until exhausted, eat quietly, sleep dreamlessly or try to. The rhythms of frontier life kept the memories at bay, kept him from remembering the man he'd killed in that St. Louis alley, justified or not. It was a Thursday morning when his quiet life ended. Sarah Blackwell stood at the edge of the mill yard, perfectly still, watching the men work with an intensity that made them uncomfortable. She wore a simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back severely, her face beautiful in a way that seemed carved from stone. "Don't stare at that one," muttered Jacob, the mill foreman. "That's the Blackwell widow. Her husband died last winter under circumstances that make a preacher question God's justice. Women won't speak to her. She lives alone up the ridge, and grown men cross the street rather than pass her." But Thomas wasn't listening. He was watching Sarah's eyes, not cold as he'd expected, but searching. Their eyes met across the lumber yard. Everything changed. 2 weeks later, he found the courage to approach her beneath the pine trees. "Ma'am, I'm Thomas Brennan." "I know who you are," she interrupted, her voice surprisingly warm. "I'm the man from Missouri who doesn't ask questions, the only man who hasn't looked at me like I'm something to be feared or conquered." "Maybe I should be afraid." Sarah smiled, small, sad. "Maybe you should, but you're not, are you?" "No, ma'am." "Then walk with me, Thomas Brennan, and I'll tell you a story about fear and marriage and what it means to survive." They walked. Sarah talked. By sunset, Thomas understood 2 things. Sarah Blackwell was not the villain this town believed her to be, and he was going to marry her, consequences be damned. They married quietly 3 months later. At first, life felt like the peace Thomas had been searching for, but there were strangenesses. Sarah never wanted to go into town. When Thomas suggested they attend a Sunday social, she'd tense, her fingers gripping whatever she held until her knuckles went white. "I'm not welcome there." Then there were the nightmares. Thomas would wake to find Sarah sitting upright in bed, staring at nothing, breath coming in panicked gasps. When he'd reach for her, she'd flinch, actually flinch away from him. "I'm sorry," she'd whisper. "I'm so sorry, Thomas." "For what, Sarah? What are you afraid of?" But she'd never answer. The third strangeness was the locked trunk beneath their bed. Heavy oak, bound with iron, secured with a serious lock. He'd asked about it once. Sarah's response had been immediate and sharp. "Don't touch that, ever. Promise me, Thomas." "All right, I promise." But the trunk haunted him. What could she be hiding? One afternoon, while Sarah worked in the garden, Thomas found himself staring at it. His hand hovered over the lock. "Looking for something?" Thomas jerked upright. Sarah stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "My first husband's name was Daniel," she said quietly, sitting on the bed. "He was charming when we courted, but after we married, I learned what he really was, what he was capable of when no one was watching." Thomas's blood ran cold. "He hurt you every day, in ways the town never saw. And when he died," she looked up at Thomas, eyes bright with tears, "when he died, they all assumed I'd killed him." "Did you?" Sarah's smile was bitter. "Does it matter? Would you still sleep beside me if I said yes?" That night, Thomas lay awake, listening to the wind and wondering what secrets lay locked in that trunk, wondering if love was enough to outrun the past. Trouble started when Daniel Blackwell's brother rode into Redemption Creek. Marcus Blackwell, younger than Daniel, harder, with a reputation for violence, arrived asking questions about his brother's death. "You need to take Sarah and leave," Jacob warned Thomas at the mill. "Marcus Blackwell's got money, connections, and a grudge." Thomas rode home faster than he'd ever ridden. Sarah was checking windows, loading Daniel's old rifle with practiced efficiency. "You heard," she said, without looking up. "Why didn't you tell me Daniel had a brother?" "Because I prayed he'd never come." Her hands were steady. "Marcus wants revenge, and he wants that trunk." A sharp knock on the door. "Mrs. Blackwell?" called a voice, dripping with false courtesy. "Marcus Blackwell here. Time we had a conversation about my brother." Thomas opened the door. Marcus was tall, lean, with cold eyes and two rough-looking men flanking him. "Mr. Brennan, I hear you married my brother's widow. Quite a risk. State your business." "My brother died under suspicious circumstances. The law said accident, but Daniel never fell. He was careful. And I believe your wife knows what really happened." Marcus pulled a paper from his coat. "I have a court order to search these premises for evidence." Thomas stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "You're not coming in without the sheriff." The two men behind Marcus shifted toward their guns. "Thomas," whispered Sarah, "let 'em in. It's time." Thomas turned to look at her, and what he saw made his heart drop. This was the fear she'd been dreading. Whatever was in that trunk was about to come out. Marcus strode into the cabin, his men flanking him. In the bedroom, the trunk sat like a coffin holding buried secrets. "Open it," Marcus commanded. "I don't have the key," Sarah said quietly. "Then we'll do this the old-fashioned way." He nodded to his man with the crowbar. "Wait," Thomas said. "Sarah, where's the key?" "It's around my neck. It's always been around my neck." With shaking hands, Sarah pulled out a thin chain and handed Thomas the key. "Whatever's in there, we face it together." Sarah's eyes filled with pain. "You don't understand what you're saying." Marcus snatched the key and opened the trunk. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marcus began removing contents: a leather journal, letters, a blood-stained shawl, a small pistol, and photographs wrapped in cloth.
Marcus opened the journal, flipping through pages. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. "What is this?" Sarah's voice was steady now. "It's the truth. Everything your brother was. Every time he hit me, I documented it. Every threat, every injury. It's all there. The photographs show what he did when he thought no one would see. The gun is the one he held to my head the night he died." Thomas felt the floor drop away. "You're lying," Marcus said weakly, but he kept reading. Thomas picked up one of the photographs. What he saw made his stomach turn. Sarah, bruised and bloodied, cowering in a corner. "He documented his own crimes," Thomas said, voice tight with rage. "The night he died," Sarah continued, "he came at me with that gun, said he was going to end it. We struggled at the top of the stairs. The gun went off. He lost his balance and fell." She turned to Marcus. "I didn't push him, but God help me, I didn't try to catch him either." Marcus sat on the floor, journal in his lap, tears in his eyes. He wrote it. "Tonight I'll teach her what happens when she disrespects me." He looked up at Sarah. "How long?" 14 months. Marcus stood slowly. "I came here for justice, and he was murdered, just not by you." He moved toward the door. "I'm sorry for what he did, for not seeing who he really was." "Marcus," Sarah called, "take the journal. Show him to anyone who still whispers about the dangerous widow Blackwell. Let him see what I survived." Marcus nodded and left. The cabin fell silent. Sarah crumpled, and Thomas caught her, holding her as she finally broke down and wept. They sat on the floor for hours, Sarah in Thomas's arms, the trunk open beside them like a wound exposed to air. When her tears subsided, Sarah pulled away. "You should go. Pack your things. I'll understand." Thomas stared at her. "Go? Why?" "Because now you know. I let you marry me without telling you everything." "Stop," Thomas said firmly, taking her face in his hands. "You want to know why I came to Redemption Creek?" Sarah's eyes widened. "I killed a man in St. Louis, shot him dead. He attacked a young woman. I intervened. He pulled a knife. The law called it justified, but his family wanted revenge, so I ran." Thomas's thumb brushed her cheek. "I understood you from the moment I saw you, Sarah. I recognized the look in your eyes because I saw it in my own mirror." "Aren't we damaged?" "No, we're survivors. There's a difference. You didn't kill Daniel. You survived him." Thomas pulled her close. "You're afraid of losing me. That's what this has always been about." Sarah nodded against him. "Well, I'm not leaving. Sarah Brennan, you are the bravest woman I've ever met." For the first time since Marcus knocked, Sarah smiled. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Perfect for each other. Two broken people who understand that broken doesn't mean unfixable." "What do we do with all this?" "We burn it. All except enough to shut up anyone who questions your story. You've carried this weight long enough." "And then?" "Then we leave. Find a place where you can stop being the woman everyone fears and just be Sarah, my wife, my home." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief. "I feared you. Not that you'd hurt me, but that you'd leave me. That's not fear of me. That's fear of loss. That's what love is, giving someone the power to hurt you and trusting they won't." As they burned the evidence outside in the rain, Sarah leaned against Thomas and felt for the first time in years the possibility of peace. 3 weeks later, Thomas and Sarah Brennan rode out of Redemption Creek at dawn, heading for Oregon territory. On their last morning, Sarah visited Daniel's grave. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of you." She turned away and didn't look back. As they rode west, the morning sun warming their backs, Sarah looked lighter somehow, as if she'd finally set down a weight she'd carried too long. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked. Sarah smiled, full and genuine. "I'm thinking about how I used to believe the worst thing would be for someone to know my secrets. But you saw all that, Thomas, and you stayed." "Of course I stayed. That's the miracle, to be fully known and still be loved." Thomas took her hand. "We gave it to each other." At the ridge top, Sarah looked back at Redemption Creek one last time. "Do you think we'll ever stop running from our past?" "I think we're riding toward something now instead of away from something. Toward home, the real kind. The kind that's not a place, but a person. A promise that no matter how hard the frontier gets, we face it together." They rode down the far side, leaving Redemption Creek behind. Ahead stretched miles of untamed frontier, dangerous, unpredictable. But for the first time, in longer than either could remember, they weren't afraid. In the town they'd left behind, people'd tell the story for years, but they'd get it wrong. Because Sarah Blackwell had never been the dangerous one. She'd only been afraid. And Thomas Brennan had taught her that fear and love could exist in the same heart. That being broken didn't mean being beyond repair. And that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was trust someone enough to let them see you as you really were. Thank you for listening to this tale here on Frontier Love Tools. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe, because out here, every sunset hides another story waiting to be told. Until next time, may your trails be clear and your hearts be brave.